Hi, I'm Paul Denman. I help people to manage their finances for them and their families for the future. And I'd like to say a very warm welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Programme, hosted by Jonathan Bowman-Perks.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And it's lovely to have you on here. It was Rara Plumtree who very kindly said she found you incredibly inspiring and she wanted you on the series. So it's lovely to have you here. Tell us a bit, Paul, about what you're doing right now, and then we'll perhaps go back to the early childhood to learn about the man who you are today with all the experiences you've had and the kind of quirks. I think we describe ourselves as the incomplete leader, hopefully trying to build a complete team. But tell us about yourself now, and then let's go back to childhood.
Yeah, well, predominantly today, my role in life has been in financial services for the last 36 years. And my role has developed over time to be somebody who holds the hand of people metaphorically in looking after their finances, managing their money, making sure that the next generation, indeed the next generations, plural, are okay. Helping them through the minefield that is regulation today and how things work in the financial world. And basically, I see them as being their financial friend, if you like, the person that they can pick up and say, I'll phone Paul, he'll know the answer to that, he'll be able to help. It's as far away from the bad old days of selling products and so on that people remember from the 80s and so on, very much be the client's friend.
That's brilliant. And being the client friend is quite an important one. Sorry, I had a bit of a coughing fit there.
That's okay.
Let's go back to childhood. Tell us about, where you grew up, who was the inspiring leaders or the figureheads who shaped the values that you hold today and the way you show up with your clients.
Yeah, I grew up in Tonbridge in Kent, had a very happy childhood. Probably the two people who I looked up to the most, for the whole time that they were alive, actually, both of them. First of all was my maternal grandfather, who was a very, very interesting man. He fought in the First World War. He was a private in the trenches and had numerous injuries from shrapnel and so on. But never spoke of them, and got better, went back out and did it again, type thing. And he was the most astonishingly, having been given a few weeks to live, my parents had moved into a new home. He decided to dig up their entire garden, get rid of all the builders' rubbish from the new house build that was there, and dug great big trenches all around the garden and backfilled all of the rubbish into there and put all the nice soil on the top. Broke 5 spades and a couple of pickaxes, having been given a few weeks to live, and then lived another 13 years. And I think that incredible tenacity and strength of character, when somebody says you've got a few weeks to live, to then just prove them wrong completely. So that was certainly somebody who was and I learned a lot about him, about the outdoors and growing vegetables and gardening and all sorts of things like that. But that wasn't the point. He and I were great friends. And my father was also it was my biggest influence in my life. The one thing I learned from him that has been probably the most useful thing in my entire life is how to treat people, and to crack your joke, not take anything too seriously, do what you say you're going to do. Sometimes that, we all know, that isn't always possible in life. You can't always live up to the expectations you give yourself and others. You try, but to be fair to everybody, to treat everybody fairly, and to and to be an honest and friendly, chatty individual, and take time to talk to people. So huge influence in that, and I probably didn't realize until quite recently how important that has been career-wise.
It's lovely to have that kind of upbringing and that kind of role model. And it's interesting, your grandfather, my grandfather, was also in the First World War in the Honourable Artillery Company, and was injured twice and left in a trench to die, but crawled back after 3 days. They thought he was, "Hello, George. Good to see you back, old boy. I didn't think I thought you'd bought a blighty, or you'd gone." But he was never kind of right after that. And like that generation, they all smoked heavily. So he died of lung cancer eventually. But I think probably looking back, he was suffering from PTSD from all the shell shock he had. But they all just thought he was a grumpy old man. So it is interesting, the influence of your grandfather and of your father. And in your life, What, as you look back on all the different experiences, what about proudest, happiest moments, and what about a dark moment, and what did you learn from both of those moments?
Yeah, I've been very lucky in that I've had, other than the death of the odd relative and my father and so on, I've been very, very fortunate as an individual. I don't think I had too many dark moments. I think something that I was also picked up from my late father was a love of the theatre, and I got involved many years ago with a local theatre company, and we incorporated it eventually into a charity after it was about 100 years old, and did a lot of local charitable work through that by raising money for charity through the theatre. And I think one of my darker moments when doing that, which is in a way is funny. We had lots of volunteers and people, and I was chairing then a board of 10 or 12 people, and the feeling amongst the board members were that a number of people were not pulling their weight. There were quite a lot of people who came along, had a bit of fun on stage, did nothing else, and disappeared, or in the bar after the production, quicker than I could run 100 meters. But so one thing I did on one particular occasion was we were in this great big gymnasium at a school where we used to rehearse our plays, and I got everybody. I was doing a talk about various things, and I got everyone. I said, right, everyone over this side of the room. So everyone went to one side of the room, and I then said, right, on the other side of the room, please, all those people who sit on our board, all those people who serve on any of our subcommittees, all those people who showed up for the marketing event in the town last Saturday, all those people who have helped with costumes or whatever it was. There were about another 5 or 6 categories, and it left a bunch of people over one side, and who were the people who'd contributed nothing, nothing at all to anything that year. In some respects, I thought it was inspired leadership. In other ways, it was a bit of a dark time, because I managed to unintentionally upset probably a quarter or a third of the company in one 5-minute, not quite rant. However, I mean, it was a dark moment. It was a dark moment in many respects, because I then sort of didn't know what to do. I got some people on one side of the room who were upset, and some other people who were feeling quite smug. And I hadn't actually achieved anything, other than perhaps that some people suddenly thought, oh, we don't do very much. But I look on the bright side of that and think, well, that's been spoken about over the last, that was in 2007, I believe, on numerous occasions since. And often when I was still chairman of that company, I threatened that we would do it again. So, and yes, and it was funny. It was a dark moment of suddenly realizing I'd put myself in a position I couldn't get out of easily. I'd upset half the people. It was an interesting situation.
Looking back, how do you think you could have made the most of that occasion? I think it's a good idea to have done that, but how do you think you could have made the best out of it now, looking back?
Oh, I've thought of that many times. It would have been very simple to say, look, I'd just like to congratulate the people who've been doing lots of things. We've still got another 2.5 months left. There's plenty of opportunity for you to join this crowd over here. So we have nobody on the left-hand side of the room, by the time we get to March or November or whatever month it was. That would have been the win. All I did was really criticize. I didn't do any stroking of anybody. It was I didn't make best. It was the idea had some really good thoughts behind it, but it came across perhaps slightly too aggressively when everyone is a volunteer.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking exactly as you'd said, but also what's almost like taking them as a group and say, look, can you work out each of you in turn, what skills and attributes do you bring? Where would you like to add some value? Because we need your help. Which particular area are you going to choose? Can you choose an area?
Yeah. No.
Or find your happiness elsewhere, as one of my old bosses would say.
Yeah.
Oh dear, that's brilliant. I love that. And talking about better advice, aren't we all so smart after the event? Oh gosh, I think of the occasions where I've got things so badly wrong, and then that it's so easy to, I think it was Steve Jobs who said you join up the dots afterwards and you make sense of what went on, and we can be armchair critics on any particular thing, or great sportsmen where we would have been a much better coach of Liverpool than the actual coach himself was, but of course we never were. I think it's called the Denning-Kruger effect. The Denning-Kruger effect.
Oh, right.
I was just reading about this in an excellent book. Denning and Kruger got together, did some research, and the book is called Think Again, by Adam Grant. And he's basically saying that the guy who designed things like BlackBerry did incredibly well, got it going, and it was really so successful. But then he didn't think again. He just carried on, not accepting that things had changed and the Apple phone was coming along. But equally, Steve Jobs, he loved the Apple as a computer, and they said, his team, his engineers said, we need to have a phone. No, I don't do phones. We don't do phones. None of that phone stuff, mobile phones, not us. We are beautiful computers. And they kept on at him, but he did think again, because obviously, as you know, it's all famous now. 6 months later, he goes, oh, all right, then what is this phone thing? And they presented to him this thing, okay, we'll try it. I'm not sure it's good. Of course, it's taken the world by storm. But the BlackBerry guy wouldn't think again. He carried on with his set way of thinking. So the Denning-Kruger effect is when your competence does not match your confidence. So people are full of their own self-importance, and they're awfully, like the guy in charge of Iceland during the financial crash. He was one of 20 people to cause the crash. He knew nothing about financial services, but he was in charge of all their banking system, and and told that the banks he wouldn't support them, and they all crashed, and it rippled onto Britain, as you know from personal experience. Denning-Kruger effect, when you meet someone who is so arrogant that they don't realize they could be wrong and they need to think again. You ever come across anybody like that, Paul?
Yes, I have one. They shan't be named. But the other thing that occurred to me in that particular situation was I allowed my frustration at some of the people, not pulling their weight to boil over into, a situation. Yeah, it would have been the better thing to have done in that whole situation was have a quiet word with the people who weren't doing anything, one by one, individually, which is what I would do today. That is exactly what I would have done today. It's what my father would have done if I'd looked back and thought about that. So, yeah, take the time to talk to people and find out why they're not doing something. You don't know what's happening in their lives. And of course, exactly. Things like mental illness are becoming much more prevalent now, talking about it at least than they ever were 10, 15 years ago. So, learn, understand, listen, and then make a decision, not just shoot from the hip because you feel a bit frustrated.
So true, isn't it? So true. Praise publicly, and find reason to chastise quietly and privately. Never public ritual humiliation, which was very much a military thing. And that all parade, one step forward. What are you doing, Perks? Stand still. You're fired. Oh, all right. Thanks. Okay. What about the advice that you'd give to the young 18-year-old or 16-year-old Paul Denman? Now you've made all these mistakes you've made in life and learned lots. What bit of advice?
I imagine that will be the easiest question you'll fire at me today. For me, and it's something I have a son who's 8 years old, and I would say the same thing to him if he was sitting here at this moment. Is to be confident, be more confident in yourself, believe in yourself. I look back at amazingly, and we go back to my father and the theatre side of things, because when I was probably even as old as 13, 14, 15, I was incredibly shy, and to telephone the train set shop and ask for a piece of my train set and agree to go if they had it and go and collect it later that day was beyond me. I couldn't do that, to pick up the phone and make a phone call and speak to somebody I didn't know. Unwittingly, by my father encouraging me in his passion of the theatre, I learnt that if you're on the stage, in the middle of the stage on your own, and it's your turn to speak, sing, dance, whatever it is you're doing, then you have two options. One is walk away or do it. There are no other options. So for me, it would be to have confidence in what you're doing, believe in yourself. And if you do make a mistake and you look a bit stupid, learn from it. Don't worry about it. So absolutely all about confidence. And I think so many people don't have confidence in their own abilities.
I think that's beautifully put. And I remember I got a bit of advice from someone in the early days when I was lacking confidence in public speaking. And he said, I'd like you to go up and make about 5 mistakes, words you get wrong, things you get wrong, 5 of them, all right? I'd like you to fail 5 times on stage. And of course, somehow that liberated me from being worried about anything. I had 5 to fail. And then somebody else said to me about, ring up people to get new business. And look for about 10 rejections. See if you can log 10 rejections. I'd like you to have 10 people saying no. And of course, we're trying to get 10. You then actually got 7 others who said yes. which of course I never would have made the call in the first place if I wasn't trying to hit that target of getting 10 saying no. Not that I was trying to be turned down, but it's just interesting when you're prepared to have a go and fail, and failure is all right, which many organizations are getting better at, but it was often not allowed. Failure was not an option. I mean, that was the problem with Lehman Brothers, where, you know, it was a good news culture. Someone I knew who worked there, he said failure was not an option. And therefore, when things were going well, that was great. Good news, good news, good news. But then when things turned the other way, they couldn't fail. They had to be good news. So they would make stories up and they would change charts and tell people to change their statistics. And that caused some people I knew to lose hair because they knew it was not right, but they couldn't have bad news. And that's never good.
No, I mean, to err is human, isn't it? We make mistakes. We're fallible. It's what happens. And if we learn from them, we move on and we don't do the same thing wrong every day. You know, there's a massive learning there, isn't there? And and having the confidence to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I got it wrong. I'm really open now to let's try again, but let's try and do it in a different way, and let's make it better. You know, that's how we learn. And I think that whole culture of getting things wrong and the blame culture in life is hopefully getting a lot better in the world today.
Yeah, in many areas it is. That's very true. And I still meet leaders who, when I ask them when was the last time you personally got it wrong, they go, could have been 79, maybe 1984. Oh, come on, really? No, really? Seriously, they go, no, I don't think actually, I make pretty good judgment. I can't think of a time I got it wrong. That is a problem, I say to them. But the normal, authentic leaders go, do you know what, Jonathan, I make mistakes frequently, and I admit it quite early, hopefully recognize it early enough and try and do something about it. And it was Norman Schwarzkopf, the American general,
Yes.
said, I'd rather have you fall on your arse in peacetime than in war. Go out there and try and fail, but learn from it so that when the moment comes, you're well experienced. So talking about failure and being honest with people, it takes me to the first of the Inspiring Leadership Compass 8 elements, which is MQ, moral intelligence or integrity and moral integrity quotient, which is about, you know, your foundational values and learning when you slip and how you get yourself back on track again to being true to your values, because you work in a whole sector where there's a vast majority have very high integrity, but it's been famed and it's been in the newspapers, whether it be Ponzi schemes or whether it be people with synthetic CDO swaps trying to get a Ferrari, where there's a lack of integrity. What have you learned about that whole area of morals and integrity, and particularly in banking?
Well, I think doing the right thing is the most important thing. Doing the right thing, what is right for the people you're dealing with, it be that your team of people you work with, be that for the company, be that for your clients, and that's in no particular order, by the way. It's very important to do the right. If you keep doing the right thing, the results come. If you try and get the results by doing things that aren't right, it's categorically going to go wrong. Not maybe next week, next month, even next year, but at some point it will have gone wrong. And so doing the right thing, and I always say to people, look, don't ever get in a situation where you're looking over your shoulder because you've tried to shortcut something in a way that's not quite right or not in the spirit of it all, and so on. If you keep doing the right thing, the results come. People will, you know, applaud you for that at some point, or you'll win relationships, you'll win business because people realize that you're straight and you do the right thing. Cutting out some of the rules and regulations that we have to live in today, you know, they're there for a reason, aren't they? They weren't dreamed up just to make life difficult. No. So that's absolutely my life.
No, and I love that. And it's always this one, you know, I know that in my past when I've got things wrong and I've broken my own code, you've got to just look at yourself in the mirror and go, no one else knows, but you know, you've got to do the right thing. And I think looking yourself hard in the mirror and going, you know, I almost have this collection of people, whether it be Marcus Aurelius or my late father or thing. I sort of imagine that they're with me, and I go, well, what would they say? And you sort of, you know what the right thing is, but often people manage to obfuscate and go, well, you know, it's sort of, it's within the it's within the letter of the law, but it's not in the spirit of the law. And I don't know what your views are on that.
Yeah, I think, look, you know, when you've been around for a while, you know what's right and wrong, don't you? You know what's the right thing to do, and if you're in any doubt of that, to have a think before you do it, and look at it the next morning. But it's usually we're all pretty clear. Anyone if you're confident in what you do, you know what you're doing, you will know what's right and wrong. And I think you've just got to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning when you're shaving and know that you're doing the right thing as much as you can. You know, occasionally you get a curveball, but you know, if none of us get it right all the time, but if you're doing the right thing nearly all the time, then that's going to carry in good stead, I think.
I think so. Yeah. And then PQ is the next one, meaning and purpose, purpose quotient. What gives your life meaning and purpose? Why do you, or have you done what you do?
You know, without that horrible cliche, that's a very good question. That is a very good question. I realised that in what I do, and my role probably in the last 20 years has been almost exclusively a people-facing role and dealing with people. Now, they may be people with a little bit more money than the average person, but they are people all the same. And whether they're famous or they're a famous racing driver or they're somebody in the media, they're all still people. And really, my win in life, if I'm very honest, is to have people think, what a good chap, Paul's done a good job, that's worked really well for me, I'm very happy. And regardless of whether they say it or not, it's knowing that you have done that. And I think that is a far greater reward, I think, than the other types of reward that are there. And I enjoy helping people with, you know, issues that they have, things they've got to sort out, responsibilities that they have to make sure things are in order, and it working out, and you know, and then being happy.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I like that very much. A sense of, you know what you like to do and you know where you can add value, and it's not like a job because you enjoy it so much, and it's people, about people, and they feel that you've looked after them. So if we move from that to health and well-being, HQ as we talk, mental health, physical health and well-being, what have you done over the years to look after your mental and physical health and well-being? And what have you done when you've let it slip and you've had to bring it back on track? Any tips and advice?
I'm a massive believer in the outdoors, nature, wildlife as a huge addition to health. That really is elements that I really couldn't do without. I would be a little bit rubbish if I was living permanently in an inner city situation. I like to look out and see wildlife, fields, woods, you know, greenery. So that's a huge thing for me. I think also for me to I look at a traumatic time in my life when my father died, and I look back at that, and I was fortunate enough to be on stage in a theatre the week after, and several people said, "How on earth did you manage to do that within such a short period of your father dying?" And I said, "I'm not sure I'd have coped if I hadn't been doing that." So, but that was in something which I see, using the word inverted commas, family. I have a theatre family. I have my family, and then I have my career and my work and my clients and other groups of people that, you know, that make up one's own network. But that theatre family carried me through that very dark 2 or 3 week period, by being supportive, being funny, being entertaining, and of course taking my mind off of the other things. So I didn't have time to think about it. So that was a very supportive and good time. So yeah, the outdoors, doing something that you love doing, and I think, look, singing, dancing, acting, if you're doing that properly, you cannot think of anything else anyway. So it's a brilliant way of getting the stress out of the body.
Yeah, it's very true. And humor, we were discussing, you and I, earlier before we were doing, is very important. Can you think of a story or an anecdote which made you all laugh at the time? And you don't have to tell it in a way that we all laugh, but just to make us smile. What could you think of an amusing occasion?
Humpty Tum. I'm sure there have been so many millions of them, but I'm just trying to think of a. Do you know, I might have to come back to that actually,
Yeah,
Jonathan.
do. Well, come back to it.
There's nothing that I've got a little bit of
No,
mental
and it's like when you put someone on the stage and say, right, tell us a joke. I can't think of a joke right now. But we'll come back to that one. CQ is the next one, which is cultural intelligence quotient, which is adapting to different people, different environments, different backgrounds. From famous film stars and motor racing drivers to anybody in any role. How do you adapt and treat everybody just the same? And what do you do about diversity, equality, and inclusion, which is part of cultural intelligence quotient?
Yeah. Well, I work for a business. The inclusion is an enormous part of it. It's taken very seriously and rightly so. I think that in very much in my role professionally, I meet a vast number of very different people. Let's exclude the last 12 months when none of us really met that many people at all. But beyond that, I'm fortunate enough to meet vast numbers of very, very different people over the course of the year. To an extent, one has to be a little bit of a chameleon and to fit in with your surroundings to a degree, because if there's 100 people in a room, no one person will get on with all 100 of them perfectly. I've yet to meet the person who does. Maybe there is a person out there who does, but most probably you won't. So in a way, one has to listen to those people, bite one's lip occasionally, because you don't always agree with people, but you don't need to tell them that. That's fine. Sometimes there's a time and a place to tell people that you disagree or you don't have the same view. But on the whole, listening is by far and away the most important thing. As somebody once said to me, look, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio. And it's, I can't remember who said it. It was probably somebody very famous, but it was a fantastic thing to remember. So if you do listen to people around you and you try to understand them by listening and hearing their point of view on things, in a way you start to fit in with them a lot better, and you become more involved in their world because you can see it from their point of view. It was like in the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, there was the lovely quote that you and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact words, but the quote was along the lines of, you can't really judge a man until you've spent a day walking around in his shoes. And I think that listening and being involved and understanding somebody's point of view is the secret.
Yeah, which takes us nicely on to emotional and social intelligence, a part of cultural intelligence in some ways. You talked about listening already, and we have two eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion is exactly right in emotional and social intelligence, and being really interested in someone's life story and who they are. And even on these videos that you and I look at each other's eyes, which is always quite hard because the camera is somewhere different from where your eyes are. If they come up with a great invention, which is like a camera that moves behind the screen where the other person's eyes are, then that would be marvelous, wouldn't it? I'm sure someone should invent that.
Well, we heard it here first, Jonathan. So
yeah, we heard it here first. Yeah, I'm sure I should patent it. But what have you done? Because emotional and social intelligence is a key part of your role, and certainly dealing with private clients and getting to know them and what they really need and their needs. How have you learnt the skills apart from father and from the theatre? Where else did you study? Did you read about it? Did you watch others? What did you do?
It's interesting. I think you build that up over a period of times, and emotional intelligence. I think you either have a reasonable amount of it or you don't. And we're all good and bad at different things. Some people struggle with that as a subject a little bit. I think that recognizing a very good example is in the work that I do. Quite often I find myself in what I call a networking situation, where I've been invited to the opening of, the launch of, the talk about, the whatever it is, which is standing there with a glass in your hand, turning up, there's 100 people in the room. You realize that you only know the host and they're busy because they're talking in 5 minutes time, so you can't go and talk to them because their mind's on other things. They're only going to give you a nod and say hello, and that's fine. That's exactly how they should be. They've got important stuff to do in 5 or 10 minutes time. So one thing I've learned is to just quietly, so don't stand in the middle of the room, stand at the side of the room and just look around and take in the room for a few moments. You can accidentally look at your phone for a couple of seconds and look over it and look around and not just stand there staring, obviously. But the person in the room who's standing there very clearly on their own at the other side of the room, who also doesn't know anybody else, what they crave is having somebody to talk to, because at the moment they feel a bit out of it because they're on their own. And going over and saying, "Oh, hello, I might have seen you before," or blah, blah, or coming up with some little piece of small talk just to get a conversation going and to learn about them as a person. And that couldn't be any better as a win-win, because you then are also speaking to somebody. You're not feeling out of it because you're with somebody, they're with somebody, and you've met a new person, which was the whole point of going to this anyway. So that's it's a win-win-win from where I sit. So I think just spotting the person who looks like they are in the position you probably find yourself in, and aligning yourself with them.
It is fascinating, the whole study of human behavior and group cocktail parties. And I don't know about you, but I certainly remember in a number of them where you're with someone who's quite senior and you wanted to have a chance to chat with them, and they're looking over your shoulder at someone much more interesting and important. And you can tell they're not at all interested in the conversation you're having with them. Perhaps that's just me, maybe. But also, it's very interesting when you look at, you study feet and where the feet are pointing, because sometimes you can work out if there's space to join in the third part of a triangle between two people where their feet might be slightly in. But if they're straight onto each other and there's no other space, you can't really come and join as the third person unless the foot is slightly pointing out and they're almost open to another person joining. It's quite interesting to watch feet. That's a bizarre thing I studied in body language, what everybody knows, as in everybody knows.
But you alluded to eyes and looking at people's eyes, and eyes are very important. Our voice is important, obviously, but also, and it's harder on these screens, isn't it? And I think probably where we've all had a little bit of a vacuum over the last 12 months for the obvious COVID reasons, is that we've been confined generally to speaking either on the telephone or on Zoom calls, as we are now. I think really what we're missing there, and where it's much harder for people, particularly less confident or experienced people, to build up rapport with people they don't know and to get to know people well, is you're trying to do it all almost certainly from voice. Because even on this call, Jonathan, occasionally there's little bits where we're not quite completely synchronized with our lips and the volume, and that's just how it is. And if you're missing out a little bit on the lips and the face, and the sound is coming at a different speed to that, and you can't see the feet pointing in different directions, hand movements, whether arms are crossed in a defensive way or open, it's an awful lot. So I think it's made it a little bit, as fantastically convenient as these things are, and they really are, we've lost a little bit of that ability to understand people.
Yeah, I think we have. And I think some people will find it quite hard to go back to those social settings. There'll be a great rush back to socialize for some people, but those who are the ambiverts or the introverts will be less excited about it. They'll like to meet a few, but then their energy will probably be spent and they'll want to leave and be back in their own room. So it is an interesting one. And as for the stress that goes with people and the travel, many who've been in very busy jobs, travel, always away from home on flights and things like that, or trains and planes and automobiles, they have had the chance to be with their family, their close ones, and actually it's rebuilt for many who are in healthy relationships. It's rebuilt those relationships, and they've also looked after their health and well-being and their sleep. But for those whose relationship was already holed below the waterline, being stuck in the same room or same house as with someone they don't like, and unfortunately it's been terminal for their relationship. So I think the divorce lawyers have been busy with those people who finally realize that actually being with a person that they've loathed for 20 years but haven't had to see them is the end of it. But that's an interesting story in itself. Let's go into resilience, talking about people getting on with people they might not get on with. I'm very lucky. I'm stuck here with my wife and Archie, our dog, and then it's so nice now to be able to see one or two people and meet them, at least with our children who all got their own homes. But how do you pick yourself up in times of adversity? If we talk about resilience against adversity, what do you do to pick yourself back up?
I think largely largely, we do that piece of business for you. So then I largely put a lot of these off there, and as gloomy as January probably 2021 was, with the latest lockdown and so on, you have to sit and think, well, okay, this isn't that bad, is it? I'm confined to my house, which is warm and secure, and yes, I'd quite like to go and meet some friends, and I'd like to go out and do some things. I can't do that, but actually, there's a TV, there's a telephone, there's and for me, luckily, there's a garden and there's some outdoors. But I think one has to put. I think perspective is the answer there, really, and just think that there is always somebody worse off. There's your perspective is, yeah, you're irritated or a bit hacked off by what it is that's gone wrong, happened, and that may be a major health thing, it may be everything else. But you've got to look at the bright side and put it all in perspective and let's not focus on what we haven't got or what went wrong. Let's focus on the positives. Okay, we haven't got that thing didn't happen, but hey, we've still got everything else, so it's fine. I know there are some dire situations. I don't want to in any way belittle, some more dire situations that some people find themselves in, but for me, that's the answer, is just put it in perspective.
Yeah, perspective is very important to us. Two tips I got. One was the 10-10-10, and the other one was your best friend. 10-10-10 is when you have a dire situation which needs lots of resilience and adversity, it is to imagine how important is this issue I'm worrying about? How important will it be in 10 weeks' time? How important will it be in 10 months' time? And how important will it be in 10 years' time? And then if you really go, well, in 10 years, I won't be thinking about this at all, then that's good. And the other one was the military one was, has anybody died? Well, if they haven't, let's put this in a sense of proportion. And then your best friend was, if you have a problem and you're really mulling it over, imagine if your best friend had this problem and write down the advice you'd give them if they had exactly the same scenario and problem you had, and then take it. Because we're terribly good at giving advice to our best friend, but we're not good at giving really good advice to ourselves. So yeah, we're great wizards at advice to everybody else, but hopeless at taking it. From resilience to brand, BQ, brand reputation, image, impact, your job relies on your personal brand, your reputation, your image, you're being trusted, a trusted advisor on financial and wealth management issues. What do you do to learn about, feedback on yourself, 360 feedback, how people perceive you? Is it aligned with how you see yourself? Because your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room, not what they say about you when you are in the room. So what's your advice on this?
Look, that's a very, very easy question to answer. And I think, look, I think the best advice you get quite often is from the people perhaps more junior to you who look up to you, and ask them how, I think it absolutely encourages people if you say to them, look, I want you to let me know if there's if what we're doing at the moment, if there's any things you think we could do better, I could do better, have a think about it. What things are we doing that, if you were me, you would do differently, and things like that. Firstly, that you get some interesting feedback if they're honest and genuine about it, which most people are. And secondly, you also, I think, encourage others to feel more highly regarded and more involved in whatever it is you're doing. And I think it's something I learned really quite a long time ago, was to say to people, look, if you can see a better way of us doing this, please let me know, because that also takes away the opportunity for anyone to have a moan about the way you're doing things, because you're asking them to help you make it better before they've done that. And I think that's my win really there.
Yeah, great one. I love that. And then legacy is the last part of the compass before we go on to talk about teams, book recommendation, and your top tip. But what would you, legacy is about leaving a stewardship, leaving things better than you found it. What would you like your legacy to be in your lifetime, as well as after you've gone?
Yeah, I would like to think that professionally, the clients and people that I have looked after, been involved with in a business perspective, will occasionally mention some of use some of my catchphrases, or mention some of the things that I've said, or would remember some of the comments I've made. The one we made earlier on about, look, just do the right thing, and it'll all be okay. Those sort of ideas. And finding that person in the room who's got nobody to speak to, finding and going and talking to them, having the confidence in yourself and so on. But just remembering some of those words of advice, that I'd be so touched if some people, quoted me on that and remembered. I think with what I do in what I've done in the theatre world will be to just remember fun and us having a lot of fun helping other people by raising money to help other people, and there are many stories, although I couldn't remember the funny one earlier on, but there are very many, some not suitable for this forum, but it's but I think really is to be remembered as as a good person who tried to help people in some way or other, encouraged, help the underdog a little bit, help those who perhaps didn't have the same good fortune that I've had in some respects in my life, and those perhaps who didn't have a role model. And I think to be a role model of not taking things too seriously, to have enjoy oneself in what you do professionally, enjoy oneself in what you do in your spare time, and if you don't enjoy something, either change it or stop doing it, but don't carry on doing it and telling everyone you don't enjoy it. We've all got choices, so that sort of thing really is my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and think about legacy. I see a picture behind you with a coat of arms on. Is that some historical bit of legacy? What's that all about? Tell me. I found some details of the Denman family and a coat of arms. I'm not quite convinced that if you went to somewhere else you wouldn't find a different set of coat of arms. But it's but no, it's there. It just talks about the Denman family and how the name originated. Oh, that's right. And how did it originate? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was people in an area in a clearing in a wood, and it was, I think it was an Anglo-Saxon, it derived from Anglo-Saxon. So there's no fantastic. There was a sort of Denman who there've been one or two famous Denmans in the past, but it wasn't something as if there was it wasn't sort of the Richard the Lionheart or anyone like that. So
you remind me of when I was with the Scots Guards. We had a cavalry regiment with us who were very pucker, and a number of the officers were arguing over whose ancestor had come across to England with William the Conqueror and this kind of stuff. And they were trying to out sort of big each other. And the commanding officer was a very languid guy, and he put down his newspaper and he said, "My ancestor was William the Conqueror," and lift up his newspaper. Bill Rollo was his name. It was a name like Rollo. That's great. So executive teams, you've worked with a number of teams over the years, yes. Good teams and toxic teams. What's your advice, and how have you seen people deal with toxic individuals that make a team toxic, and how have they made it more high performing? What's been your experience and your advice?
Well, I think I learned a long time ago from a gentleman who was involved in the team building side of the England rugby team in the years leading up to them winning the World Cup in 2003, and he did a talk for me when me and colleagues, not just for me obviously, but for colleagues at a private bank I was working for. And this is around 2006 or something like that. And the thing he said, look, and this has always stuck in my mind. He said when he became involved in Team England, whenever that was, I'm guessing the late 90s, he said there were three sorts of people. He said there were the people who were completely on side for what the team wanted to achieve. There were those people who in the second group who, with a bit of persuasion and coaching and the right leadership, could also join the group who were completely on side with what the team's objectives were. And then he said that, look, there were a third group of people, and he used the word, they were traitors. Now, that wasn't to say that they were necessarily doing anything bad in any way, but they were people who didn't have the same outlook as the people who were really on side with the team. They might have been individually fantastically talented people, but as a team, they were not. They were not part of a team. They were out for singular glory. Potentially, they were people who were looking to to shine in their own right, but not be part of a team. And he said, look, what you had to do was you had to, keep the good guys, get the people who were more or less on side, properly on side, and you had to lose the traitors. And he didn't name names. He didn't need to name names. It wasn't about that. It was the theory of the whole thing. And I think that in any team situation, if you're as likely as not to find people who don't share the same objectives as the team. They're there because they have to be, or they're employed to be, or they're paid to be, or whatever it might be, or they think they ought to be, but that they don't. And the simple, in my opinion, the simple answer to that is to have a conversation with them individually, to go and find out why they're not, to understand what makes them tick, to understand, is this the right thing for them? Would they not be better doing something slightly different? And that isn't about getting rid of people. It's just understanding what the issue is and why they don't tick perhaps in the way that the rest of the group do. But the only way to deal with it, I think, is to have an individual one-to-one conversation with those people and find out the issues and find out what it is. And is it because they think they should be the chairman, or they should be the head honcho in that group, or whatever it might be? And if it is, well, look, give them tips on how they get there. Not just, but for some people just end up, the square peg in the round hole, don't they? Not everyone ends up in the right role. And sometimes you help people enormously by getting them out of the round peg out of a square hole and finding a round hole for them, because that's if nobody's taken the time, and maybe that they'll always be the square peg.
That's brilliant. And there's the other one, which is the keeper test, that if they were to go to another team or another organization on the same salary, and they said they were about to go, would you fight hard to keep them, or would you be very happy and relieved that they'd gone? If they are not passing the keeper test, then why have you got them in the team? And you need to know that you would fight for them, and they're really top talent. I think that's good. So before we go into the top tip, where you'll introduce yourself again, what would be your book recommendation? Something good on leadership that you've read over the years that you find good and you recommend to the people listening to the podcast?
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking more of just a general book recommendation rather than one on leadership. And it harked back to the book, which I haven't read for a while, just because it's been a very, very busy last few years, but I've read more than once, is Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks, which is a book wholly ingrained in the First World War. And I hark back to the beginning of this interview when we talked about my grandfather, and that was something that I realized, that having had no experience of the First World War at all, and not even discussed it with my late grandfather, it was something that I found myself incredibly interested in. And when I happened to pick that book up as a recommendation by an old friend, and it was the most astonishing read for me, and it was so beautifully, I just thought, beautifully written, and to hark back to help me imagine what it must have been like, all those years, over 100 years ago now, for my grandfather.
Yeah. So tough for them, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but yes, I hadn't thought of that question in light of
Birdsong is one I will definitely now have a listen to, and thank you for that. That's great. So let's go into the final 2-minute top tip. Would you just introduce yourself again, Paul, and share what your top leadership tip would be, and why you found it helpful, why you think others listening would find it helpful?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Paul Denman. I work in financial services. I help people to manage their finances for themselves, their families, and future generations. My top tip, really, for everybody who listens to this, is to listen to everybody in the room, and not just the loudest people. If you're sitting in a meeting environment where there may be 10, 15, 20 people, it is very easy to listen to the loudest person and the most confident person, who almost certainly will speak the most. I've made a point in my life of giving everybody the opportunity to say something, by perhaps going around the room and saying, right, let's go around the room from the left. I'd like please give me your opinion on what we've just been discussing, so we can hear your opinion. Therefore, you hear everybody, not just the loudest. That way, I think also you're treating everybody fairly. You're getting, everybody has the same opportunity to give their point of view, and I think you come out with better outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Well, stay on the line, Paul. But I really thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership series and for sharing your life story and some of your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you.